The late afternoon sun, filtered through the old oak leaves, cast a dappled light across our living room, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. It was a picture of domestic tranquility, one I had carefully cultivated over years. I'm Eleanor Vance, and at 28, I thought I had it all figured out, or at least, I had found my perfect corner of the world in Ann Arbor. My life here was a comfortable rhythm of teaching art to bright-eyed middle schoolers, tending to my ever-expanding collection of houseplants, and most importantly, coming home to Clara. Clara. Her name used to feel like a warm hug, a promise of shared laughter and quiet evenings. She was everything I thought I wanted: vibrant, intelligent, with a laugh that could make me forget every bad day. We had built this life together, brick by emotional brick, in our cozy little house, surrounded by books and the scent of freshly brewed coffee. Our home, nestled on a quiet street, felt like a sanctuary, a place where the world's harsh edges softened and we could just be. I loved my job. Seeing a child's face light up as they finally understood how to blend colors, or watch their clumsy brushstrokes transform into something recognizable, was incredibly rewarding. It grounded me, gave me purpose. And coming home, sharing stories from our days over dinner, walking our scruffy rescue dog, Buster, through the treeland streets, that was the sweet reward. We had plans, big plans. A garden in the backyard, maybe fostering a child someday, traveling to Italy when we saved up enough. Our future felt tangible, within reach, a tapestry woven with shared dreams. But all those threads, those meticulously crafted hopes, began to unravel with a single, chilling phone call. I was away at an art teachers' conference in Chicago, a rare trip that took me out of our shared bubble for more than a weekend. We de-talked every night, Clara's voice a comforting balm over the miles. She sounded normal, cheerful even, complaining playfully about Buster's latest mischief and asking about my workshops. There was no hint, no tremor in her voice, nothing to suggest the seismic shift that was already underway back home. The call came late on a Tuesday night. It was Clara. It was a number I didn't recognize, an Ann Arbor area code. My heart did a little flutterkick of anxiety. Clara usually texted if it was urgent. I answered, my voice a little shaky. "Hello," a man's voice, low and gruff, came through the line. "Is this Eleanor Vance?" "Yes, who is this?" I asked, my grip tightening on my phone. "This is Officer Miller, Ann Arbor Police Department. I'm calling about your residence at 123 Maple Street." The world tilted. Police. Maple Street? My mind raced, conjuring images of burst pipes, a break-in, a fire, Buster. What happened? Is Clara okay? Is Buster okay? The questions tumbled out, urgent and panicked. There was a pause, a heavy silence that stretched for an eternity. Then Officer Miller cleared his throat. "Ma'am, your partner, Clara. She's at the station. We found her in your home with a male individual. There was a disturbance. We need you to come identify her." A male individual, disturbance. What on earth was he talking about? My mind struggled to process. Clara wasn't the type for disturbances. She avoided conflict like the plague. And a male individual, we were always so careful, so private. "Identify her. Is she hurt?" I pressed, a cold knot forming in my stomach. "She's physically unharmed, ma'am," he said, his tone carefully neutral. "But we need you to come to the station. As soon as possible." I mumbled something about being out of town, about driving back immediately. Call ended, leaving me in a sterile hotel room, the city lights outside my window suddenly menacing. My carefully constructed world had just shattered into a million pieces. The drive back to Ann Arbor was a blur of frantic thoughts and choked-back tears. Every mile closer felt like driving into a nightmare. My phone buzzed with texts from friends, asking if I was okay, if I'd heard. Clearly, the news was spreading. Ann Arbor isn't a huge city, and bad news travels fast. I ignored them all. I couldn't explain. I didn't even know what to explain. I pulled into the police station parking lot just before dawn, my eyes burning from lack of sleep and relentless crying. The air was crisp, unyielding. Inside, the fluorescent lights hummed, casting a harsh glow on the weary faces of the officers and the grimy waiting area. Officer Miller met me, his face etched with a mix of pity and professional detachment. "Ms. Vance," he said, leading me to a small, windowless interview room. "I need you to prepare yourself. This is complicated." Complicated, an understatement of epic proportions. He began to explain, his voice a low drone against the frantic beating of my heart. Clara had called the police herself. Not because she was in danger, but because the man she had invited into our home refused to leave. And then came the words that would forever scar me, words that would replay in my mind like a broken record, poisoning every memory I had of our life together. She told responding officers, Ms. Vance, that she had invited the man over. She admitted to propositioning him. She begged him to rape her. The air left my lungs. The room spun, begged him to rape her. My Clara, the woman I loved, the woman I had built a future with, had not only invited a stranger into our home, our sanctuary, but had begged him to violate her. The shame, the horror, the utter betrayal crashed over me, a tsunami of pain. It wasn't just a disturbance, it was an obliteration of trust, of love, of everything I believed our relationship to be. Officer Miller continued, his voice distant, as if from another dimension. The man, it turned out, had refused. He was reportedly shocked and uncomfortable, and when Clara became agitated and wouldn't let him leave, he had called the police himself. He was the victim here, in a twisted, unimaginable way. Clara was arrested, not for assault, but for harassment, for creating a public disturbance, for a litany of smaller charges that felt like footnotes to the grand, grotesque tragedy unfolding before me. I remember nodding numbly as he spoke of bail, of a restraining order, of the man's statement. My world had not just tilted, it had flipped upside down and inside out. The woman I thought I knew was a stranger, a monstrous parody of the Clara I loved. The betrayal was so profound, so absolute, that it felt physical, like a fist in my gut. They let me see her. She was behind a thick pane of glass, her face pale and drawn, her eyes vacant. She looked small, almost childlike in the oversized jail jumpsuit. She saw me, and for a fleeting moment, a flicker of something, fear, shame, crossed her face. But there was no apology, no explanation, no recognition of the chasm she had just torn open between us. She just stared blankly. I couldn't speak. The words were choked in my throat, tangled with anger, confusion, and a grief so sharp it felt like a wound. This wasn't my Clara. This wasn't the woman I promised forever to. This was a stranger, someone capable of unimaginable darkness who had desecrated our home and our love in the most unthinkable way. I left the station with a mind reeling and a heart shattered into irreparable fragments. I went home, not to our home, but to my sister's place. I couldn't bear to step foot back into that house, the place that had once been our haven, now tainted by such a disturbing act. Every corner, every object, every memory would scream of her betrayal. My sister Sarah was a rock, her quiet presence a small comfort in the vast emptiness that had suddenly swallowed my life. She didn't ask many questions, just held me as I sobbed, the tears a torrent of disbelief and anguish. The next few days were a blur of lawyers, court appearances, and the relentless hum of public speculation. Ann Arbor might not be huge, but everyone knew everyone, or at least knew someone who knew someone. The story, twisted and sensationalized, spread like wildfire. My friends didn't know how to react. Some were sympathetic, others awkward, some, I suspected, were judging. I felt like a pariah, not because of what I had done, but because of what had been done to me. The shame was suffocating, a heavy blanket that smothered all light and hope. Clara made bail. Her family, who I had once considered my own, looked at me with a mixture of pity and defensiveness. They didn't understand. They couldn't. How could anyone understand? She moved back into our house, the audacity of it stinging like an open wound. It was still legally our house, but I couldn't bring myself to go back. Not yet, maybe not ever. I spent my days in a daze, going through the motions of existence. The art classroom, once a vibrant sanctuary, now felt sterile, the colors muted, the children's laughter echoing hollowly. I couldn't focus, couldn't pretend. My colleagues, bless their hearts, covered for me as best they could, but I knew I was failing. My spirit, once so bright, had been extinguished. Every now and then, I'd catch a glimpse of Clara, a fleeting image in my mind, a phantom scent, a distant memory of her laugh. And each time, it was immediately replaced by the image of her in that jail jumpsuit, her blank stare, the officer's chilling words. She begged him to rape her. The disgust was overwhelming. How could someone I loved so deeply, someone I shared my most intimate moments with, be capable of such depravity? The pain of the betrayal was a living thing, clawing at me, refusing to let me rest. But beneath the pain, slowly, inexorably, something else began to stir. A cold, hard resolve. I had spent my entire adult life building a future, a home, a love. And in one night, it had all been systematically dismantled by the one person I trusted most. I was left with nothing but shattered pieces, a public humiliation, and a heart that felt like a wasteland. The humiliation, more than anything, was what fueled the nascent anger. The whispers, the pitying glances, the knowing looks. I was no longer Eleanor, the kind art teacher, the beloved partner. I was Eleanor, the woman whose girlfriend had done that. My identity had been hijacked, redefined by Clara's monstrous act. I knew, with a certainty that solidified with each passing day, that I couldn't just walk away and let this be. I couldn't let Clara's actions define my future. I couldn't let her get away with destroying my life and walking away unscathed. There had to be consequences. There had to be a reckoning. The naive, trusting Eleanor was gone, replaced by a woman hardened by betrayal, a woman who understood that sometimes justice wasn't served in a courtroom. Sometimes it had to be carved out with your own two hands. I started spending hours online, not scrolling through social media but reading. Legal forums, articles about revenge, stories of people who had been wronged and found their own ways to reclaim their power. I wasn't looking for violence, not exactly. I was looking for poetry. A way to make her feel a fraction of the pain, the humiliation, the utter devastation she had inflicted upon me. Ann Arbor might be a small town, but it also meant that reputations mattered. And Clara's, once spotless, was now deeply tarnished. But mine was too, by association. I needed to separate myself, and then I needed to make sure that the full weight of her actions fell squarely and publicly on her. I would not be the only one to carry the shame. The seed of an idea, dark and chilling, began to take root in the fertile ground of my broken heart. The seed of an idea, dark and chilling, began to take root in the fertile ground of my broken heart. It wasn't about physical harm, not for a moment. That wasn't who I was, not even the broken version of me. My revenge needed to be precise, poetic, a mirror reflecting Clara's own ugliness back at her, amplified for the world to see. It needed to strip her of the one thing she cherished almost as much as her flawless reputation, her carefully constructed image of victimhood. My first step was to move out of Sarah's place. As grateful as I was for her quiet support, I couldn't build a new future or plot a revenge from someone else's spare room. I found a small apartment on the outskirts of Ann Arbor, a quiet place overlooking a park. It was modest, certainly not the cozy home Clara and I had built, but it was mine. It was a place where I could breathe and, more importantly, think. Buster, my faithful, scruffy companion, was a constant source of comfort, his warm head against my leg a reminder that not all love was conditional. The legal battle over the house was ongoing. Clara, through her family's expensive lawyer, was trying to claim full ownership, painting me as the one who abandoned our shared life. It was a cruel twist, and it fueled my anger. Our home, the place she had defiled, was now another weapon in her arsenal, but I wasn't going to let her have it. I wanted that house gone. Not for me, but to sever the last physical tie, to erase the very space where her betrayal had bloomed. I told my lawyer, a no-nonsense woman named Ms. Henderson, that I wanted to force a sale. Split the assets, and let the house stand as a monument to her shame, sold off to strangers who would never know the horror it had witnessed. Ms. Henderson raised an eyebrow, a flicker of surprise in her usually stoic expression. "That's an interesting strategy, Eleanor," she said, but she agreed to pursue it. My revenge began, not with grand gestures but with careful, almost artistic planning. As an art teacher, I understood composition, the careful placement of elements to create a desired effect. This was no different. Clara was known for her outward perfection, her role as the dutiful, intelligent, slightly shy young woman. That was the canvas I needed to paint over. My idea centered around one undeniable truth: Clara's family. They were pillars of the community, prominent figures in local charities and social circles. Her father was a respected university professor, her mother a volunteer at the local hospital. Their image was everything. And Clara, in her monstrous act, had not only shamed herself but had cast a long, dark shadow over their pristine reputation. They were, in a twisted way, victims of her actions too, but they were also her enablers, quick to defend, quick to smooth over. They were the key to my plan. I started by subtly reaching out to people. Not directly, not with accusations. That would make me look bitter, vengeful, and undermine my goal. Instead, I focused on those who had offered genuine sympathy in the wake of the scandal. My colleagues at school, a few close friends, even some parents of my students who had heard the rumors and offered kind words. I started small, with carefully chosen words, painting a picture of my emotional devastation, my confusion, the utter bewilderment of how someone I loved could do such a thing. "I just don't understand," I'd say, my voice laced with a genuine sadness that didn't feel feigned because it wasn't. "Clara was always so fragile, so innocent. I worry about her, you know. What kind of darkness must be inside someone to even think such a thing, let alone invite it into our home?" I wasn't blaming her, not directly. I was framing her as disturbed, deeply troubled, and in desperate need of help. This wasn't entirely a lie. I did believe she was deeply disturbed. But my intent was not to help her. It was to sow seeds of doubt, to gently pry open the crack in her perfect facade that her actions had already created. The reactions were predictable. Sympathy for me, certainly, but also a growing unease about Clara. People started to whisper not just about the incident but about Clara herself. Was she truly as sweet and innocent as she seemed? The questions I posed, subtle as they were, started to circulate. My next move was more deliberate. I knew Clara frequented a particular coffee shop downtown, a popular spot where many university faculty and their families gathered. It was a place where information and gossip flowed freely. I started to go there too, not when Clara was there, but strategically to be seen. I'd sit alone, nursing a coffee, looking lost, a little frail. Sometimes I'd accidentally run into people I knew or people who knew Clara's family. Eleanor, darling, how are you holding up? A woman from Clara's mother's book club might ask, her eyes full of pity and curiosity. Oh, I'm trying, I'd sigh, offering a weak, brave smile. It's just so much to process. I keep thinking about Clara, what she must be going through. It's hard to reconcile the person I loved with what happened. I just hope she gets the help she needs. I truly do. My words were carefully chosen. They expressed concern, but beneath that concern was a sharp needle, implying that Clara was not just a victim of circumstances, but someone with deep-seated psychological issues. I was not painting her as evil, but as broken, unstable. In Ann Arbor's polite society, that could be even more damaging. It turned pity for Clara into concern, then into suspicion, and finally, into a quiet judgment. No one wanted to be associated with someone who might be unstable. I also began to write. Not a diary, but a series of anonymous online posts, not on Reddit this time, but on local community forums, using a throwaway account. I wrote about the devastation of betrayal, the struggle to understand how someone you loved could shatter your world so completely. I didn't name Clara directly, but I alluded to the details of my situation, details that were by now public knowledge in our small community. I wrote about the feeling of home being defiled, the struggle with public shame, and the desperate need for healing. I crafted these posts with an artist's touch, evoking empathy for my plight, and subtly, implicitly, demonizing the person who caused it. The responses were overwhelming. Other people shared their stories of betrayal, of navigating complex breakups, of seeking justice. My posts became a rallying point for those who felt wronged, and in doing so, they amplified the narrative I was carefully constructing. I was the wronged party, the victim, and the other person, the unnamed perpetrator, was clearly unstable and deserving of public scrutiny. Clara's lawyer, Ms. Henderson, informed me, had caught wind of the online chatter. She was threatening to sue for defamation, arguing that even without naming Clara, the posts were clearly about her and were damaging her reputation. This was exactly what I wanted. It meant my subtle campaign was working. It meant her family was feeling the pressure. But this success came with a cost. The emotional toll was immense. Every conversation, every carefully worded post, every interaction felt like a performance. I was constantly reliving the pain, constantly immersing myself in the horror of what Clara had done. Sleep was elusive, haunted by replays of Officer Miller's words. I lost weight, my already slender frame becoming almost gaunt. My art classes, which used to be my solace, felt more like a chore. My students noticed, their innocent questions about my well-being a sharp stab to my heart. I was becoming consumed by this mission, and the woman I was before Clara's betrayal was slowly fading away, replaced by this bitter, calculating version of myself. One afternoon, I received a call from Clara's mother, Mrs. Davies. Her voice was cold, clipped. Eleanor, we need to talk. This has gone far enough. Your little campaign against Clara needs to stop. My campaign? I asked, feigning innocence, though my heart was pounding. Mrs. Davies, I'm just trying to heal. I'm trying to process what happened. Don't play coy with me, she snapped. Those awful things you're saying, the rumors you're spreading, you're destroying her reputation and ours. We've done nothing but try to help you both. Help me, I echoed, a genuine tremor entering my voice. You let her move back into our house, the house she desecrated. You're defending her while I'm left to pick up the pieces of my shattered life and public humiliation. The facade cracked slightly, my anger bubbling to the surface. There was a pause, a sharp intake of breath on her end. You think you're the only one hurting, Eleanor. This has devastated our family. Clara is unwell. She needs our support, not your cruel accusations. Unwell? I scoffed. Is that what you call it? Begging a stranger to rape her in our bed in our home. Is that unwell, Mrs. Davies, or is it something far darker? Something you're desperately trying to sweep under the rug? The conversation devolved quickly after that. She accused me of being a vengeful, bitter woman, consumed by hatred. I accused her of enabling Clara, of refusing to acknowledge the depth of her depravity. We hung up, the line crackling with unspoken fury. My conversation with Mrs. Davies, far from deterring me, only solidified my resolve. They were circling the wagons, protecting Clara. That meant my efforts were striking a nerve. But it also showed me the extent of their denial and how far they would go to protect their own. I knew I needed to escalate. The subtle whispers and anonymous posts were good for chipping away, but I needed something more direct, more impactful. My revenge had to be public, undeniable, and impossible for Clara's family to dismiss as mere rumors. The legal battle for the house was moving slowly, bogged down by Clara's lawyer's tactics. Ms. Henderson advised me that forcing a sale would be a lengthy, draining process, and even then, Clara's family might try to buy me out, keeping the house within their control. That wasn't the poetic justice I was seeking. I wanted that house to be a public symbol of Clara's shame, not just a financial transaction. And then, another thought sparked, brighter and more dangerous than anything before. It came to me while I was sketching in my new apartment, trying to find some peace in the lines and shadows. The house. Not just selling it, but what happened in it. The police report, the details, the specific actions Clara took. It was all public record, or could be, if you knew where to look and how to frame it. Ann Arbor was a town of historical societies, neighborhood associations, and online community groups obsessed with local lore. What if I didn't just sell the house, but exposed its history? What if I made sure that anyone who even considered buying it knew the dark secret it held? It wouldn't be defamation if it was true and verifiable by police reports. I started researching public records. It wasn't easy. There were layers of bureaucracy, privacy laws, and red tape. But I was determined. I spent hours at the county courthouse, sifting through documents, learning the intricacies of local property law and access to police reports. My art teacher's eye for detail, once used for color palettes, was now laser-focused on legal jargon. What I found was disheartening at first. While the incident was public knowledge, the specific, salacious details of Clara's proposition to the man were harder to officially document in a way that would stand up to scrutiny. The official police report focused on the harassment, on the public disturbance, not on Clara's initial horrific request. That part was often relegated to witness statements and internal interviews, which were much harder for a civilian to access. This was my first major setback. My carefully constructed plan to expose the history of the house, using official records, was faltering. It felt like I was hitting a brick wall, and the frustration was immense. The emotional toll of constantly digging into the past, reliving the trauma, without a clear path forward, was starting to wear me down. I felt trapped, caught between my burning desire for justice and the cold, unyielding reality of legal and societal barriers. The initial rush of righteous anger was slowly being replaced by annoying despair. Was this truly worth it? Was I just hurting myself more in this relentless pursuit of revenge? My therapist, who I had started seeing at Sarah's insistence, tried to steer me towards forgiveness, towards letting go. "Eleanor," she'd say gently, "your anger is understandable, but it's consuming you. It's not hurting Clara, it's only hurting you." But she didn't understand. Forgiveness felt like surrender, like letting Clara win. Letting her walk away with her carefully crafted facade intact, while I was left with the wreckage. That was a fate I refused to accept. The idea of letting go felt like being asked to give up a vital part of myself, the part that still believed in justice, even if I had to carve it out myself. I knew I needed a new approach, something that bypassed the official channels. Something that leveraged the power of information and the deep-seated fears of a community that valued appearances above all else. I needed to move beyond simply talking and hinting. I needed to act. The setback with the police reports didn't break me. It made me realize I had to be more creative, more cunning. If the law wouldn't give me the tools I needed, I would forge my own. The stakes felt higher now, the pressure more intense. My desire for retribution was no longer just about fairness, it was about survival. It was about reclaiming my name, my narrative, and my sanity from the shadow Clara had cast over it all. The setback with the police reports was a cold splash of reality, but it didn't extinguish the fire. It merely forced me to reconsider the kindling. If official documents were locked behind bureaucratic walls, then the truth, in its rawest, most visceral form, had to find another avenue. My revenge, I realized, couldn't rely on dusty court files. It had to live in the air, in the whispers, in the collective conscience of Ann Arbor. It had to become folklore, a cautionary tale. I spent days, then weeks, pacing my small apartment, Buster a constant, furry shadow at my heels. My mind churned, dissecting every social interaction, every community group, every unspoken rule of Ann Arbor society. I was an artist, and this was my most intricate, most painful composition yet. The medium wouldn't be paint or clay, but perception, reputation, and the subtle, insidious power of a well-placed truth. Ann Arbor, for all its charm and intellectual veneer, was still a small town at heart. Everyone knew everyone, and gossip, though often cloaked in polite concern, was its lifeblood. Clara's family, the Davies, were masters of this game. Their carefully curated image was their shield, their armor. And I knew, with chilling certainty, that it was also their greatest vulnerability. My new approach began with a deeper dive into the community. I joined online neighborhood groups I'd previously ignored, attended public town hall meetings I'd once scoffed at, and even started volunteering at a local soup kitchen, a place I genuinely wanted to help, but also a place where diverse stories and local news flowed freely. I wasn't seeking information, I was planting seeds. I never spoke Clara's name directly. Instead, I spoke in generalities about the devastation of trust, the pain of betrayal, the struggle to find justice when institutions failed. I spoke of the importance of community integrity, of holding people accountable, even those in positions of respect. My words were always cloaked in sadness, not anger, making them harder to dismiss. "It's just so hard," I'd say to a fellow volunteer while sorting donations, "to see someone you thought you knew, someone the whole community respected, turn out to be, well, not who they seemed. And then to watch their family try to pretend it never happened, to sweep it under the rug. It makes you wonder about everything, doesn't it?" The questions hung in the air, loaded with unspoken context. People knew what I was talking about. They had heard the rumors, seen the hushed glances. My words gave their suspicions validity, a gentle nudge towards a narrative that Clara's family was desperately trying to suppress. The effect was subtle but cumulative. Suddenly, people began looking at the Davies family differently. Mrs. Davies, at her weekly charity luncheon, might notice a few more averted gazes, a slight hesitation in conversation. Mr. Davies, at a university event, might find his usual easy banter met with a touch more formality, a hint of distance. The air around them, once thick with deference, was now tinged with a faint chill. This wasn't enough, though. The whispers needed a catalyst, a focal point. My revenge needed a stage. It came to me during one of my late-night sketching sessions. I was trying to express the feeling of a defiled sanctuary, of a broken home. My hands moved almost on their own, drawing the familiar outline of our house on Maple Street, but with shadows stretching from its windows, twisting into monstrous shapes, the front door a gaping maw. It wasn't a drawing of our house, it was a drawing of a feeling. And then, it clicked. Ann Arbor had a thriving art scene, with several local galleries and community art spaces. One particular gallery, known for its edgy, thought-provoking installations, held an annual open call for local artists, encouraging pieces that explored social themes. It was perfect. I began to work on a new art piece, a sculpture. I sourced old, discarded dolls from flea markets and thrift stores, carefully stripping them of their innocence. Some I painted with vacant, hollow eyes, others I posed in contorted, desperate positions. I used shattered pieces of mirror to create a mosaic floor, reflecting distorted images of the viewer. At the center, I built a miniature replica of a house, not explicitly ours, but generic enough to be any home, yet with a subtle nod to the architecture of Maple Street. Inside this dollhouse, through carefully cut windows, one could glimpse scenes of domesticity twisted into something unsettling. A tiny, crumpled figure on a miniature bed, a faceless doll standing over it, a third doll with hands raised in a gesture of horror. The piece was called Sanctuary Shattered. Its description, which I meticulously crafted, spoke of the fragility of trust, the unseen darkness that can invade the most sacred spaces, and the profound trauma of betrayal within a home. It was abstract enough to avoid direct accusations, yet specific enough for anyone in Ann Arbor who knew the story to immediately grasp its meaning. It would be my public statement, my artistic truth. I submitted the piece under a pseudonym. Eleanor V., the gallery committee, intrigued by its disturbing beauty and provocative theme, accepted it. The week before the exhibition opening was a blur of nervous energy and grim determination. I worked relentlessly, ensuring every doll, every shard of glass, every shadow contributed to the intended emotional impact. Buster, sensing my turmoil, would often rest his head on my lap, his soft fur a grounding presence. The opening night arrived, a crisp October evening. I stood near the entrance of the gallery, anonymous in the crowd, watching the faces of the attendees as they encountered Sanctuary Shattered. I saw the initial confusion, then the dawning recognition, and finally the quiet, uncomfortable understanding. Whispers rippled through the gallery, hushed and knowing. Isn't that? I heard one woman murmur to another, glancing at the dollhouse. It has to be. Who else? Her friend replied, their eyes wide with a mixture of shock and morbid fascination. I saw Clara's mother, Mrs. Davies, enter the gallery with a group of friends. She moved with her usual regal air, a tight smile plastered on her face. But as she approached, sanctuary shattered, her composure faltered. Her eyes, usually so sharp and self-assured, widened in horror. She saw the dolls, the shattered mirrors, the miniature house. She read the title. And she knew. A cold, delicious satisfaction spread through me. It wasn't the explosive confrontation I had sometimes dreamed of, but it was far more potent. It was a public unmasking, a meticulously crafted reveal in the very heart of the community that had, for so long, allowed her family to maintain their illusion of perfection. Mrs. Davies' face paled, her forced smile dissolving into a mask of pure fury and humiliation. She spun on her heel, her friends exchanging awkward, pitying glances. I watched her storm out of the gallery, her carefully constructed facade finally cracking under the weight of my artistic truth. The calls started the next. First, a furious one from Ms. Henderson, Clara's lawyer, threatening a lawsuit for defamation, for emotional distress, for anything she could conjure. Eleanor, this is beyond reckless, she hissed, her voice tight with anger. You have crossed a line. This is clearly about Clara. The insinuation is undeniable. Insinuation? I replied, my voice calm, almost serene. It's a piece about betrayal and broken trust within a home. A universal theme, Ms. Henderson. Are you suggesting only one person in Ann Arbor has ever experienced that? And if people are making connections, perhaps it says more about the public consciousness than my artwork. I had rehearsed this. Every word. My therapist would have despaired, but my lawyer, Ms. Henderson, had given me a grudging, almost imperceptible nod when I'd explained my plan months ago. She knew I was operating within the bounds of artistic expression, however pointed. The gallery director, a stout woman with a penchant for controversy, stood by me, citing artistic freedom. The local newspaper, already buzzing with the story, ran an article that carefully described the exhibition and its provocative piece, Sanctuary Shattered, without ever explicitly naming Clara, but leaving enough breadcrumbs for every reader to connect the dots. The article delicately touched on the recent local incidents of betrayal and the community's struggle with trust. The piece quickly became the talk of the town, not just for its artistic merit, but for the scandal it implied. People flocked to the gallery, drawn by the morbid curiosity, the desire to witness the tangible manifestation of a rumor that had haunted Ann Arbor for months. They stood before Sanctuary Shattered, whispering, pointing, their faces a mixture of shock and profound discomfort. Clara's family tried to fight back. They wrote letters to the editor, denouncing the gallery for displaying unseemly and speculative art. They tried to rally support from their social circles, but the narrative had shifted. The public perception of Clara, once a delicate question, was now solidified into something ugly, disturbing. The victim narrative they had tried to build around her crumbled under the weight of my carefully constructed, undeniably public, truth. But the triumph was bittersweet. The revenge, while satisfying in its execution, was draining me. My art, once a source of pure joy, was now an instrument of pain. Every brushstroke, every piece of fabric, every carefully chosen word for the exhibition statement was steeped in the bitterness of my betrayal. I was achieving my goal, yes, but at what cost to my own soul? I still wasn't sleeping well. The whispers in the community, the phone calls, the knowledge that I had irrevocably changed the landscape of my small town, all of it weighed heavily. I had sought justice, but had I found peace? The answer I knew was not yet. I had ripped open a wound in Ann Arbor, and in doing so I had ripped open my own all over again. The revenge was working, but I was still very much trapped in its cycle. I needed to conclude this, not just for Clara's downfall, but for my own liberation. The next step had to be the final one, a move that would fully sever the ties and allow me to finally walk away, not just from Clara, but from the bitterness that had consumed me. The calls and threats from Ms. Henderson, Clara's lawyer, were relentless, but I stood my ground. My art, I argued, was protected. It was a commentary, an expression, not a direct accusation. The gallery director, sensing the rising tide of public interest, proudly defended Sanctuary Shattered as a testament to artistic freedom and community dialogue. The local paper, subtly fanning the flames, published a follow-up piece detailing the surge in visitors to the gallery and the intense, often emotional discussions sparked by my work. Ann Arbor was consumed. The Davies family, once unassailable, found their social circles shrinking, their polite smiles met with veiled judgment. Clara, I heard through the grapevine, had become even more reclusive, her carefully constructed world crumbling around her. The whispers had solidified into a roar, and the town's collective eye was firmly fixed on their unraveling. But the hollow satisfaction of their public shaming wasn't enough for me. My therapist was right. The anger, the bitterness, it was a heavy cloak I couldn't shed. Every small victory, every sign of Clara's downfall, felt like another link in the chain that bound me to her. I wanted to be free, truly free, and that meant a final, definitive cut. It meant not just severing ties, but burying them so deep they could never be unearthed again. The house. Our house. It was the last physical tether, the monument to her betrayal. Ms. Henderson, my own lawyer, had advised me that the forced sale would drag on, likely ending with Clara's family buying me out to prevent further scandal. But that wasn't a monument, that was a whitewash. I wanted the house to scream its truth, not whisper it. My final act, I realized, wouldn't be through art on a gallery wall, but through the canvas of the property itself. It needed to be undeniable, legally sound, and utterly public. I spent days researching, not just legal precedents, but the history of real estate, the nuances of property disclosure. And then, a dark, brilliant idea began to form. Ann Arbor had a robust historical preservation society, passionate about protecting the unique character of its homes. They cherished stories, legacies, and the narrative of the town's past. And they, I knew, would be the perfect, unwitting accomplices in my final act of revenge. I approached the society not as Eleanor Vance, the wronged partner, but as Eleanor Vance, the concerned citizen and local artist. I presented them with a proposal, a unique historical preservation project focused on documenting the unseen narratives of Ann Arbor homes. My pitch was eloquent, heartfelt, speaking of the layers of human experience embedded in every brick and beam, the hidden stories that shape a community. I offered to use my artistic skills to create a compelling, multimedia presentation for their archives, a way to capture the soul of a home before it passed into new hands. They were captivated. My proposal, framed as an artistic and historical endeavor, aligned perfectly with their mission. They chose my old house on Maple Street as the inaugural project, citing its charming architecture and its central location in a historic district. They loved the idea of uncovering its layers. I suppressed a grim smile. They had no idea just how many layers I intended to uncover. Over the next few weeks, I was granted access to the house, ostensibly for my historical research and artistic documentation. Clara, under legal advisement, had to comply. Each visit was a fresh stab of pain, walking through rooms that once held so much love, now saturated with the stench of betrayal. Buster, sensing the tension, would often whine softly, pressing against my leg for comfort. I moved through the house with a meticulous, almost surgical precision. I took photos, recorded architectural details, documented the history of its previous owners. But I also gathered something else, the raw, unvarnished truth. I found Clara's journal, tucked away in a dusty box in the attic, pages filled with her self-pity, her twisted fantasies, her growing resentment of our life. It wasn't explicit about the incident, but it painted a picture of a deeply disturbed mind, prone to manipulation and delusion. I also found hidden notes, small, damning clues of her growing instability that I had once dismissed as quirks. These weren't for public consumption directly, but they solidified my conviction. My final project for the Historical Society was a series of carefully curated disclosures. I compiled a comprehensive historical narrative of the house, weaving together its architectural journey, its past residents, and crucially, the recent events that had made it infamous. I cited public police reports, newspaper articles, and anonymous community testimonials from my online posts, all meticulously cross-referenced. I ensured that the official, unredacted public statements from the police department regarding the harassment and public disturbance at the address were front and center. I detailed the profound impact of these events on the community, framing it as a crucial part of the house's modern history. I presented this historical narrative to the society. They were initially shocked, then deeply uncomfortable. But I had been careful. Everything was factual, verifiable, and presented as historical documentation of a local event that had indeed impacted the community and the home's legacy. It wasn't defamation if it was true, and the police reports were incontrovertible. Their discomfort warred with their commitment to historical truth. In the end, they accepted it, albeit with a nervous cough and a hurried vote. The Sanctuary Shattered exhibit, I noted with a chilling satisfaction, had primed them for this. The historical narrative of 123 Maple Street, including its recent, disturbing events, was officially added to the Ann Arbor Historical Preservation Society's public archives. It became a permanent, easily accessible record, linked to the property address. Any serious buyer, any real estate agent, any curious resident with a computer would now, irrevocably, stumble upon Clara's shame. It wasn't just rumors anymore, it was history. The house went up for sale. The bidding was slow, hesitant. Potential buyers, enchanted by the charming exterior, quickly became uneasy after a simple online search for the address, which inevitably led them to the Historical Society's archives, and then to the news articles about Sanctuary Shattered and the disturbing incidents. The price dropped significantly. No one wanted a house with that kind of history, not in Ann Arbor, not if they knew. Clara's family, predictably, made an offer, hoping to buy it back at a discount, and then perhaps quietly resell it later, sanitizing its past. But my lawyer, Ms. Henderson, had anticipated this. We countered with a clause, a legally binding agreement that any future sale of the property would require full disclosure of the Historical Society's narrative to all potential buyers. It was a poison pill. They would own the house, yes, but they could never truly erase its past, or Clara's, from its very foundations. They would be forced to carry the burden of its tainted history, unable to sell it without openly acknowledging the events I had so painstakingly documented. They withdrew their offer. The house eventually sold, for far less than its market value, to an out-of-state developer who had no ties to Ann Arbor, and I suspect, intended to flip it without bothering with local history. It was a financial loss, but a triumph of poetic justice. The house, the sanctuary Clara had defiled, became a symbol of her irreversible downfall, a ghost of her shame that would forever cling to the property records of Ann Arbor. With the house sold, the last chain broke. I felt a lightness I hadn't experienced since before that fateful phone call. The bitterness, while not entirely gone, receded, replaced by a quiet sense of peace. I had sought justice, and I had found it, not in a courtroom but in the meticulous dismantling of a carefully constructed facade. I had reclaimed my narrative, not through anger but through truth. My art, once a weapon, slowly began to heal. I found myself sketching again, not haunted dollhouses but vibrant landscapes, joyful portraits, images of renewal and growth. My students, seeing the return of the spark in my eyes, responded in kind. I still taught art, but now with a renewed passion, a deeper understanding of the power of expression, not just for revenge but for healing, for rebuilding. I stayed in my small apartment, Buster by my side, a testament to enduring love. I began to forge new connections, cautiously, with people who saw Eleanor, not as the victim of a scandal, but as a resilient woman who had walked through fire and emerged stronger. Clara, I heard occasionally, eventually moved away from Ann Arbor. Her family, their reputation permanently scarred, remained, living under the quiet weight of public judgment. My revenge was complete, not because it brought me joy in her suffering, but because it finally allowed me to move on. I was no longer defined by what she had done, but by what I had overcome. The story of Eleanor Vance was no longer a tragedy, but a testament to the quiet, determined power of a woman wronged, who, with a pen, a paintbrush, and an unyielding will, had carved out her own justice, and in doing so, found her own freedom. My sanctuary was shattered, but I had built a new one, brick by emotional brick, and this one I knew was truly my own, forever untainted.